Welcome to the Misophonia Podcast. This is Season 4, Episode 22. My name's Steel Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. This week, I finally get to publish my conversation with musician, coffee entrepreneur, comic writer, and serial room leaver, Jono, or Jonathan. There are a lot of creative people on the show this season, and Jono is a perfect example. First, I really want to say to please check out the album Life in Misophonia by his band, Baggage. We talk about it in this interview, obviously, but I really love listening to it. If you like indie rock with some punk and shoegazer mixed in and great melodies, you'll love this. I also want to plug Jono's coffee company, Rootless Coffee. They do small batch roasting and ship everywhere. I actually ordered their variety pack of 4 types of beans, and it's great stuff. Even mixed some shows under their caffeine energy. As you know, I'm a huge advocate for supporting businesses owned by or affiliated with my Misophonia brothers and sisters, so please take a look here, and I'll have links to all these in the show notes. Plus Jono's comics, which we will also touch on. Okay, let's get to this interview, but first I do want to say I've noticed an uptick in people leaving ratings on Apple Podcasts, which is amazing. It's really the easiest way to support the show and get it recommended by the algorithms to more people. So please take a moment to do that in whichever app you're listening on. All right, now here's my conversation with Jono. Jono, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I was very excited when you reached out because what a particular thing.
Yeah, and I know I rarely reach out. I try to let people come, and it happens, like people just kind of sign up, but you're one of the few people that's like, oh, I definitely have to get you on. Actually, somebody recommended that I reach out to you, and I was like, of course. So I did I'll babble on a little bit at the beginning here, but when I started this, I also made a Spotify playlist that I wanted to make kind of collaborative, so people can kind of put their favorite either misophonia specific songs or stuff that kind of helps them get through, and your misophonia song was one of the first ones that I put on there, and I'm sure we'll kind of tap on that a little bit. I've been listening to that kind of on repeat this week, just in preparation for this.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, yeah, and actually, yeah. Before I start babbling too much, as I am prone to do, why don't we kind of like hear a little bit about you, kind of like where you're located and kind of what you do? It looks like you have your hands on a lot of things.
Yeah, so I am located near Flint, Michigan. I've been around here most of my life. When it comes to the things I currently do or did, there are a lot of them, but to narrow it down a bit, everything from I was in touring bands. That's what I was most known for. So I was in a band called the Swellers from 2002 to 2015. Then from there, I went on to write for a few music magazines. I love that I'm trying to make my own bullet points because I'm like, I did a bunch of stuff. So currently, I guess a good way of putting it is I am one of the owners of Rootless Coffee Co. So it's a small batch roaster in Flint, Michigan. I am in 3 different bands. So Baggage, where I sing and play bass, Braided Veins, where I play drums, and then a band called No Trigger based out of Worcester, Massachusetts. And I met them years ago from early stuff, but I was also a hired gun drummer for a few years as well. So when my main band broke up, I was kind of a free floater as far as a musician. Yeah. So I would hop with other bands and be a hired gun in that way. And then on top of all those things, I'm currently the creative director for Karma Jack Digital Marketing Agency out of Detroit, and I'm a comic writer as well.
Excellent. Yes. Okay. Right. So on your, I'm gonna have links to all these, but I did notice the comic publication that you just did on Instagram. So that looks really interesting as well. Wow. I didn't realize you had that many things going on. That's amazing. Yeah. The band No Trigger, any relation to Misophonia, or was that coincidence?
Oh, absolute coincidence. Yep.
Okay. You found that band, so I figured, yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Let's just. There's so much to talk about kind of what you're doing, but maybe let's just go back specifically about Misophonia. Like, it's to the point where you're singing about it now. But how did it kind of start for you? Like, when did you start to notice it?
There were a few really big moments in my life that I go back to now. I guess the way I found out what misophonia was there was a Facebook video floating around, and I was watching it and I got teary-eyed because I was like, there's a thing. It's a thing. I just felt that way and I didn't know, what was going on. So after watching it and like getting this full explainer of going, okay, I'm not absolutely crazy like I thought I was, I would go back to certain moments. So one of them was, I remember riding in a car with my mom and my friends, and someone was crunching a water bottle, and my mom screamed like, "Stop it! That's annoying!" And I was like, I didn't think that was a big deal. That's weird. So that was the first time I observed kind of someone else having that. I'm like, huh. And then fast forward, I remember I lived in a Chicago suburb, and I think the Bulls won it was like the three-peat or something against the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, I think we're around the same age, so yeah. The references make sense.
Yeah, to date myself. So TVs were still black and white. But I remember like everyone like jumping up and cheering, and then it like, I don't know what it was. It was like a switch flipped off in my brain, and I just was very upset. And I'm like, this was really jarring, and I didn't expect it, and I didn't like that. So that was the number 2 moment. And then number 3, which was the most modern version of it. My band went on tour. We brought our friend with us, and this is the first time I've ever been around a nail biter. And I have never really witnessed that before, but there's just, and I know there's obviously triggers when talking about these certain things, so I don't want to, go into hyper detail, but it was the first time I witnessed a chronic nail biter. And I just felt this just rage, unexplainable rage every time it would happen. So I would have to start putting on music. And as a musician, you are very literally crammed in these tiny vans with people for 8 hours a day. You get to the venue, you sit backstage, crammed with a bunch of people, and that's like, you get a bunch of people eating fast food and smacking their lips and doing the whole thing. So it was kind of this like slow snowball of one of these things made me feel strange. Then I started thinking about it, which made other things make me feel strange. And then kind of more so in like, I guess this modern era of my own misophonia, I have way more triggers than I used to. It wasn't like this immediate thing when I was born, but I don't know if it was a control thing, a manners thing, a learned thing, whatever it may be. Now it is totally different. So now pretty much just anything that I feel is unnecessary, I've noticed are the main triggers for me. And that involves lip smacking while eating, nail biting, and then just like unnecessary repetitive noise, which could be from trying to fall asleep on tour and people snoring, and then me having to blast music to be able to fall asleep.
So repetitive noises, not necessarily human-made noises, or
mostly human-made.
Mostly human-made, yeah.
Yep. Because I've noticed too. So a lot of my friends are very aware, especially after we'll talk about the album and stuff. But like Life in Misophonia, the album that I did, even my parents bring up the stuff now, which is really funny. They're like, "Oh, are you okay? Is that like making you mad?" I'm like, "No, it's fine. It'll be, I don't know, water dripping or some mechanical thing maybe that's like on an exact repetition, whereas a human made one, I'm always trying to correct it in my brain, being like, it doesn't have to do that. That can be solved.
Right.
Why is it still happening?"
Right. There is free will within that person, and they've decided to ruin my life, kind of thing. Yeah. Right. Okay. So yeah, it's interesting. So just to kind of recap your childhood, at least the misophonia part. So So it was interesting. You noticed your mom. So does your mom have misophonia? Like, have you talked to her about it after that moment, or since you knew it was?
I kind of brought it up, but I've noticed it's only for certain things. So hers are tapping or TV commercial volume, and it has to be from her. So yeah, like I haven't gone to length about it, but I've definitely brought it up, and I'm like, I remember this moment. Do you? She's like, well, yeah, it's annoying, it's stupid.
Yeah.
That's about all I get out of it.
Right. So then so was it also like dinner table with the family? Did it start to like expand at that point, or was it much later that you really started to have the triggers expand on you?
I remember I was actually on tour in a band when it was like the full on trigger.
Yeah.
And it was all based on people eating in close proximity. Um, because if you have any assortment of people, and this mostly being in the band world, you're going to have one super
Yes.
snorer, and then you're going to have at least one lip smacker for chewing. So, and I feel like this will be the like revelation that we have later in the show or something. But the thing I've spent a lot of time processing, because I'm a writer and I like live in my own thoughts, which is the joy of all this. Um, I've had to force myself to come to the realization that people aren't doing things that are wrong. They are just doing what's natural to them.
Yeah.
And the control thing, I am absolutely self aware of the situation as it happens. And I think that is the upsetting part where I know this stuff is happening and I'll like jolt my neck, like if my wife maybe bites her nails or something like that. And I feel my head just snap over and stare. And then she'll put her hand down. And I'm like, that's awful. I really don't like that my body is acting quicker than my brain. Um, and I don't know if you feel that or other guests have felt that, but I've noticed it's like a strange, unfortunate muscle memory for me now.
Yeah, I was just talking about this earlier today when somebody asked, like, what do you, after talking to all these people, what do you think is this is about? And I'm like, I'm not a doctor, but it's come up where people kind of theorize whether it's almost like there are two parts of your brain go into action at that moment, where one is this kind of ancient lizard brain that is looking out for danger around you, and then there's the modern brain, which is self-aware and is in conflict with this old brain, which seems to be rewired you know, unwired or rewired in a way that is kind of assigning danger to all kinds of sounds, where your modern brain is not. And so, at least like somehow, it seems like maybe there's something dormant or something misconfigured from the past that is coming back to haunt us. I don't know if you've ever thought about it that way.
Yeah, well, like one of the first things was the whole fight or flight thing, where
Yeah, exactly.
it's that feeling. So one of the major ones for me, which is it's obviously been a very strange, awful year for a lot of people. But one,
I don't know what you're talking about, but
yeah, one like really wild thing though is my wife was like trying to not go to many movies
mm,
because when I'm in the moment, it's like I don't know how to word this. Like let's say like late at night you do something stupid or awful or whatever it may be, and then in the morning you're like, or you go through some type of trauma, let's say, and then in the morning you wake up and then you're like, I feel better now. So then it didn't happen. Okay, and then you move on. So that's how I feel in a weird roundabout way of like if I would go to the movies and people were eating popcorn around me or like maybe whispering or whatever. Again, it's a controlled thing where very literally popcorn is made to pop when people chew it. It is one of my other specifically main food trigger.
yeah,
Um, and I have a very hard time because I'll hear it. I always say it's like having spider sense without any of the benefits. Like
right.
you can't act on any of it. You just get upset. That sucks. But I could hear everything going on. So she kind of like pulled me out of going to movies, and then we started going to like matinees, and we started like trying to do different things. And then once COVID hit and movie theaters weren't a thing, and I would watch movies from home, and I would be able to focus and like enjoy myself. And then I would start going back to those moments, those fight or flight moments where I would hear someone like unwrapping a candy bar way too loud or like these really dumb things. But I remember it was so bad that I would grab my leg to feel pain so I couldn't focus on the sound. And I was like, this is such an awful response to this thing just so I could
Ah,
say I went to a movie. And I was like, it was clenching my teeth, grinding my teeth, doing all these things, whether it was, subconsciously or willingly, to get away from that feeling. And you try and combat this, like you said, like there's the old brain and the new brain, right? Like there's body parts, there's wisdom teeth, these things that haven't fully evolved. And I am absolutely aware that brains can be, wired in a certain way that's not the same as everyone else. What is unfortunate is knowing that and it's still happening. So, and I guess not to, throw a curveball on this, but I'm sure, it's the joy of conversation.
Yeah.
But I imagine, do you probably have a lot of people that deal with anxiety as well?
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of comorbidities, so anxiety, OCD, and then a lot of PTSD and CPTSD stuff that has come up for sure.
And so the reason I ask is because I have really bad anxiety, but I've noticed that like since I was a kid, I did like I would randomly just start crying for no reason or just feel like everyone hated me. All these really strange feelings, and then I never knew if the misophonia was a byproduct of that or they were working in parallel with each other, some kind of thing. Another thing I noticed too, having been in coffee, we could talk this as well. So when I was working at Starbucks like years ago, I was drinking like 6 shots of espresso per drink. Because A, stupid, but B, because all of us were like, oh man, this is stressful. Well, we should like power through it. So what we were doing was giving ourselves essentially panic attacks later in the day, but not correlating to it being affiliated with the withdrawal of caffeine, because we would do so much, and then later in the day, like there's one thing, and I'll always remember this: just going to the back room, and I was completely fine, and my face started crying, like my like emotions and physical self just completely split, and it just started happening, and I was like, this isn't good. So I like went to the doctor and I'm like, I have something going on. I need help. And the first thing they were like, just don't drink as much coffee. But what I started realizing was there's obviously a sweet spot. So for me, like mental illness and all that aside, like I always felt a bit lethargic and needed like 2 hours of brain thaw time in the morning. And I was having these jobs that didn't allow for it. So the first hour in the morning, I am irritable as hell. If someone tries talking to me, I'm already mad. Any sound is just exaggerated. And then I found if I drank coffee to like get myself to 0 as opposed to this negative feeling, then it was fine. So I eased back on coffee, did enough of it, which is, the normal human amount, not the 6 shots per thing. And for a bit, it really did help, I think, my misophonia. Maybe it was some kind of placebo effect or something, but it wasn't as bad as it was. So I do know personally that over caffeination and adding to my anxiety exacerbated the misophonia itself.
Yeah, I mean, stress comes up a lot as an exacerbator, and so yeah, interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, you're on edge when you're waiting for a trigger. So anything that like 6 shots of caffeine. Well, I've never been on 6 shots of caffeine, but I would imagine that that just kind of, I mean, that's kind of puts you on edge and doesn't really let you relax, which is another key way of kind of getting over triggers. That kind of makes sense. Interesting.
Yeah. And a lot of it was obviously trial and error on myself, unfortunately, because trying to find a network. So, for example, and not to discount it or anything, because I imagine a lot of the people probably listen to this, but I went into, it was like this is around the time the Baggage album was coming out, and I went into a misophonia, a Facebook group, and I was like, oh, we could like learn from each other, and this will be great, because in other platforms or whatever, like I'll have one for like comics professionals. So as a writer, I go in there, we all grow together, learn together. Musicians, music industry, marketing, like I'm in all these different groups. But the one I went to in the misophonia thing, what I realized there were very few helpful, like, hey, I learned from this, let's all learn together.
Right.
And it was more of like, my damn neighbor keeps hitting this thing and it sucks. And everyone, it just turned into like a lot of complaining. And I am the most like I can be one of the most negative people I know, even though I'm very hopeful and I like see the potential in everyone. But my brain auto corrects the everything sucks. I'm gonna go complain. So when I saw like a group of that, I'm like, this is not the right place for me because I need someone to like calm me down, talk me
Yeah,
out of the, you know. I don't know if you've witnessed that at all, but an interesting thing because it's this newer concept for a lot of people. But you know,
absolutely.
how does a community work together to get through it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the cycle of like what is a common cycle is like you have misophonia for your whole life. That you don't know what it is. You find out what it is, and you're all of a sudden all night you're researching because this is like a revelation. Then you find the Facebook group, and it seems great. There's 20,000 people, and then after yeah, after a few weeks, you're like, this is just like this is like three sentences of rants like every 2 minutes from different people around the world. And so you kind of like taper that off, and then but people are still looking for community. So yeah, Reddit is kind of the same thing. So I mean, there's one inspiration for this show is to kind of like be able to talk to somebody for an hour, almost like a NPR or Larry King kind of situation where we can just kind of like talk like friends and get to know each other. Because I've found that talking to other misophones, it's almost like you've known them kind of your whole life, or at least you kind of know this giant thing about them, and so there's an easy conversation, and it seems to bring a lot of solace to people. So long way of saying, yeah, I feel you. I totally agree on the online communities for miso versus some of the things that I'm in as well. Uh, there's there's a need for some other way for us to kind of all join together
And
and
I
kind of
think
get to know each other.
and that's the power of podcasts or long form interviews where obviously this is more of a conversational piece, but what I feel helps is adding all of the information around the bullet points. So you look at the bullet
Yeah,
points being I'm complaining, I'm upset, this sucks, or what do I do? uh, but having context for all that, like how someone was raised, what they go through now, and like very similar to therapy, like being wildly honest about things helps so many more people. I have never in my life heard the like when so kind of to get into it. So I started a band called Baggage, and we did like two EPs and kind of did some, you know, regional touring, whatever, nothing big. And then for our big album, I that was when my misophonia was at its worst. I was personally going through like a really hard time with a lot of other things. My band broke up a few years prior, and I was
hmm
just trying to process like I'm not in a happy place. Also, this part of my life is awful, and I feel like I'm losing control. So I called it Life in Misophonia, and that is a double play. One very literally because that was like one thing. It was so bad to the point where getting through the day was just pretty awful. And it was never that bad until that point. Number two, being a musician with the hatred of sound is a very
yes,
strange combination.
right.
Um, and that's kind of like at the time I did a bunch of interviews, and it was the first time everyone was hearing the word misophonia. And, keep in mind, I only heard it like a year or two prior to that. So I was like, oh my God, I could find some solace in this. I can meet people through this. This will be great. And a lot of my friends, like, it was similar to when I used to post like vanity plates I thought were funny. And I had like hashtag Jono plates on Instagram. And I got to like 1,000 posts or however many it was. And then tons of people started doing that. And then it became like an internet thing for a second on Instagram. And then people for years after that were texting me license plates. And I'm like, that's cool. Yeah, you don't have to do that anymore. Like I tried to like politely do it. So same with misophonia, where not exaggerating, I've probably had 50 people text me in my like people I know and being like, I think I might have misophonia. And then they asked me
Ah,
about it. And I was like, oh my God, I might be like a spokesperson for this and not realize.
yes.
Because like when it comes to entertainment, like you have this platform you don't necessarily realize. So what I wanted to do with the album, and it was before again I got into even more personal bummer stuff. Band members are leaving, like a bunch of to pull a Larry David. It's a whole thing. But like when I was getting ready to release the album, I reached out to the Misophonia Association and the Institute, Misophonia Institute, I believe. And I was like, I got on a call with both of the heads of those, and I'm like, I want to put our heads together and actually come up with this plan, because I feel like I might have a platform I didn't realize, and I want to include something with our album and like not make it to where I'm benefiting from it. And the conversation kind of like started there. We're like, yeah. And then it was like, maybe we could do like pamphlets or something that we could include in records. And they're like, well, we don't have those yet, but we can make them. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, we could do that. And then people started quitting my band like right when the album was coming out, and all of the like pieces were no longer in place. And then I was like, I'm gonna just pump the brakes, because I don't want to invest in this big movement or this thing I believe in if my own medium and engine for it is falling apart. So I kind of just was like, never mind. So I like eased off that whole conversation. And in retrospect, I wish I didn't, because I personally would have loved to pursue more and learned more and been able to like relay that information. So A, you having this podcast is great, so thank you for doing it. And then B, thank you for having me on it, because it's a very nice reminder of, oh yeah, this is the thing that I kind of just compartmentalize, so I don't have to think about it. But it is important that I do, because repression is a very real thing, and it's not a healthy thing for humans.
Oh no, thank you for that. That was really interesting context around the time of the release of that album. I want to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm familiar with the Misophonia Association and Tom Dozier at the Institute. They've both been on the podcast, and we should maybe talk after. I know you have a lot of stuff going on, but maybe we can just brainstorm a little bit after this call. But yeah, going back to I should have been writing notes, but yeah, around the time you were one thing I want to understand was when you set out to write the album, was misophonia kind of one of the main themes that you were going to write about? I know that a lot of the album is about being in a band itself, and a lot of the things that come with that. And then there's a lot of lyrics about misophonia as well. I'm curious, did you set out to write the album on misophonia, or was that something that you kind of evolved while you were working on it?
I always write, I guess, from the heart and the gut. So there's, and as you're mentioning, you're working on like a musical concept album, all that. There's something about being a creative where you just let your body do the thing, and then what comes out, you're like, oh, there it is. That's my subconscious. That's what I'm really feeling. I've always believed in doing that with lyrics. So I'd write a melody first, and then that would come after. That's not necessarily the case. I would just start singing, and I would say those words. So I started to notice a trend, and pretty much all I wanted to do was connect those dots. So the album is very much, to me, a half and half of the life in misophonia concept, where part of it was I was starting to hate being in a band in my life because of it, whereas I was watching like my friends around that world in bands and outside of bands thrive, and I was like, why isn't this happening to me? And it was just processing like really strange primitive feelings. So the song Horseshoe, for example, we played a show in Rochester, New York, and I think like 8 people showed up. And keep in mind, like, this is after the band I was in that like was starting to sell out shows and doing a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, I at the time getting closer to 30. Just what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And there's a joke in music called the horseshoe, where when there's not enough people at a concert, they all kind of like stand spread apart, and it's never someone close up to the stage in the middle. They're the one that's already all the way in the back, and then everyone does the horseshoe shape around because it's too awkward to be close. So that was kind of the whole concept on that end. And other parts of that too, like my band van that I used for years broke down on one of our tours. Like, things were very literally falling apart for that band in particular. The other half of it was processing like anxiety, depression. And then what I started noticing was like the misophonia through line through a lot of that. So why am I such an uptight person? Why am I angry a lot? And what things are being affected by that? Because I started getting hypercritical of myself for being hypercritical of others at all times. And that was a very exhausting feeling.
Yeah, that can cycle, definitely. You mind if I read it? So there's obviously the song Misophonia, but there are a couple other of my favorite songs on the album, like Choking on Nothing. I can't concentrate. They're all watching me choking on nothing. I try to shake it off, but I can't break free. Choking on nothing. I mean, that has to do with the concentration. I don't know if it has to do with misophonia, but I really felt that because, concentration breaking is like that. It's like glass breaking to me, and I feel like that kind of captures that. In Hotel Hallway, I love too. Lay in your bed and hope no one knocks. Forget to hang the do not disturb sign next to the lock. The help walks in. It's too awkward to talk. Every door is the same, and you're to blame.
Yep.
I mean that's we all feel that, but I love that. Yeah, I love that metaphor with the hotel room and do not disturb sign. I hadn't thought of that before. That's great.
And trying. So for me, I for the longest time I had trouble speaking clearly about things that were actually affecting me, but I could speak very openly about cosmetic things, right? So like, yeah, the tour is going great. We're having a good time. Oh, we have a new album coming out, whatever. And then the second I would talk about anything serious out loud without music behind it, I would start kind of like feeling that like breaking down feeling, like, okay, this is getting too heavy. And then I would back out and then I'd make a bunch of jokes because that's what I do. I'm like, my brain is very fast. So I use it for like comedy as a shield.
Me too, man. Absolutely. People would be, sorry, go on.
But I mean, to your point, like Conan O'Brien, for example, like he deals with a bunch of stuff, Stephen Colbert, like all of these very like quick-witted people.
Yeah.
Because their brain is so fast, they also are very good at processing negative emotions very quickly. And that's why I feel like misophonia being a byproduct of that as well, because like, why am I generating this thing when I don't want that feeling there? So lyrically, I was just trying to like, how the hell do you explain this to someone, right? So metaphors, here's a way you could digest that, like whatever hopeless feeling it may be. And I never, there's a line in that Hotel Hallway song. I don't know if you watched BoJack Horseman, but I was a really big fan of that cartoon that was on Netflix. And it dealt with like depression and some really serious issues. And one of the things they talked about was fetishizing sadness, and how some people willingly gravitate toward it instead of changing their life for the better and running away from it. And I kind of freaked myself out, and that song being part of that, where I was like, am I like oddly enjoying the struggle so I could talk about it and like, claim it as this thing? Like, yeah,
I think that's something every artist. Yeah, that's probably something every artist kind of thinks about at some point. It's like, am I doing this just because it's, makes me more productive, or, like if I just snap out of it, if I just stop, trying to create the next piece of art, maybe I'll just be happier. I think it's probably something a lot of people think about at some point.
And the flip of trying to suffer on purpose to make better art.
Yeah.
And that's such a like toxic, awful thing. But people get caught in that loop because they hear these sad songs where people are opening up and they're like, I want to be like that. Like, no, you don't. writing a melody is not worth the payoff. So, back on the misophonia side of things, like, because it is a seemingly abstract concept that when people first hear about it, they think it's a joke. So to put it in perspective, the drummer of Baggage at the time, he was like doing this like mouth chewing thing, like kind of as a joke to like a bunch of people, and then like kept getting closer to my face. I'm like, can you please stop, man? Can you please stop? And he's like, what? And he made it worse and worse and worse. And then I was like, I have an actual thing where this is really bad for me. Can you please stop? And then he did it more. And then the other guys had to yell at him. And he's like, what? And they explained what was going on. And he was like, oh. And that's how strange of a thing it is for so many people, as you can attest to for having this podcast and all of these guests. Like it is a trying to explain to someone, oh, so I think most people are wrong in the things they do because my brain tells me that way. So I want to have the control of having them not do that anymore, but I know I can't, so I have to live in that cycle. That sucks. And that's the heavier version of saying, I don't like sounds, which that's how people think, right? Like, I'm annoyed by chewing or something. Like, it's so much, unfortunately, deeper than that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a lot more than that, and yeah. Another thing that comes up is that it just gets exhausting for us to explain it to the point where at some point we start to calculate, like, is this even worth telling this particular person, whoever I'm in front of, because there's the probability that you'll be either dismissed or mocked or have the sound repeated is high enough that you were almost like, I just don't even bother. So we just internalize it and bottle it up. And another reason why I think, doing something creatively like you're doing is a great outlet, because rather than trying to explain it literally, which can often fail.
And
Do you
especially
find
without,
yeah,
well, I was going to say, especially without like a diagnosis, right? Like,
yeah.
very rarely it's like, oh, here's my doctor's note for this this thing I
Have you
have.
gone? Have you talked to? I mean, I don't know. I'm assuming with some of the other issues you've talked to therapists in the past. Have they known about misophonia? Have you mentioned it up or brought it up?
First, I went to a doctor who told me to drink less coffee, and I said, no, I'm already drinking less coffee from the last time you told me. She's like, huh. And that ended there. And then the therapist I was going to for other things, which is where I learned the beauty of repression and how it could lead to chemical imbalances. It was like this like really nice older lady who just, so to put it in perspective, at one point she handed me a book called The Very Worried Walrus and left the room to go to the bathroom. And it was a children's book about a walrus who was afraid to ride his bike because he didn't want to get hurt. And then finally, after he stopped coming up with excuses, he tried riding the bike, and then he was able to do it, and it was fine. And I like had this moment where I was like, I don't think this is the person to talk to about this, because I brought up to her the idea of misophonia and all that, and she was looking at me like I was speaking another language.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, well, I believe after doing my own research, which obviously people love to hear in professional fields.
Right.
Listen, doctor,
Self-diagnosis.
Sure, yeah. WebMD for everything. So I was like, from based on what I've seen and some people I've talked to, it's triggered from anxiety, OCD, or, I could count the rest on all my limbs or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah. And it was just like, well, maybe you should just, so her advice was, you should journal the things that you're witnessing. And I was like, okay. So she tried to like play along for a second. So I went to a movie that night, had another awful time. And she was like, well, I want you to work through those moments. And it was like this very, I forgot what the term is. And there's one of the doctors from the Misophonia Institute, or someone in that world, was talking about like the idea of like a positive replacement or reinforcement kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to not pinch my leg until it hurts and I'm feeling pain, and I'm going to like be present during the sounds that upset me. And it was 10 times worse. And I was like, this isn't fixed, because I have a pretty strong will, and I feel like my brain is fairly powerful, and that is not a thing that I can just change after going to a movie one time, or during the movie where it's happening. So I like, reported. She's like, well, did you try hard enough? I'm like, yep.
Yeah.
So it's a dead end,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of it's not exposure therapy, but it's kind of like, trying to fight through it and trying to change your thinking in the middle of a trigger is kind of the worst time. And so, that's something that people don't try a second time, I think.
Yeah.
Typically. So what are some of your kind of I guess coping mechanisms? You mentioned the stuff that you do when you're in a theater, but I mean, is it typical like headphones and leaving situations as much as possible, or yeah, curious kind of how your day to day is.
Yeah, so it's I'm glad this podcast is here so I could feel accountable for the things I do. Um, so initially, some of the things were okay. I need a fan to sleep. I now know that after having been on tour and having to listen to music very
Oh
loud to
yeah.
drown out all the snorers. So I was like, okay, and I had to learn how to fall asleep to music just so I could sleep because that's how bad like white noise wasn't even blocking it. Now that I'm home, I need a white noise machine, sometimes like some drops of CBD and earplugs, like that whole combination just to fall asleep because I'm a very light
Hmm.
sleeper as well.
Hmm.
Um, but I am a serial room leaver, and I've kind of unfortunately and I'll disguise it with like washing dishes or something while
Yes.
like
Yeah.
so like I'll kind of just like casually get up, I'm like, oh, I ate really fast, crazy, and then I get up and start doing the dishes, and then my wife's still eating, or
Anyone need
um,
another drink? Something like that.
yep,
Or
yeah. Or I have to go to the bathroom and check my phone. Um,
right.
so, like when I'm at my parents' house, that happens sometimes. Or like I could just feel like I don't know if you feel this way. Do you ever feel like you have almost like a level, like you're leveling up in, oh, this is going to be bad. This is going to be bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. When I go into a situation, I kind of like size up like who's in the room, like what's happened in the past, and try to figure out like how close do I need to be to the to an exit.
Yeah. So uh, while I'm in, I kind of have like a few strike rule. And again,
Yeah.
like I sound very neurotic talking about it, but like this is how I cope. Um, so for example, we'll be with like a full family like gathering thing or
Yeah.
friends or whatever it may be, and I'll I'll hear one or see one person doing a thing, and I'll be present for a second. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let this happen. I'm going to I'm going to hear what they have for me,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, okay, yeah, still bad. All right, cool, got it. And then I'll like, it's almost like lightning strikes where I count in between, and that's what I mean by like that meter essentially. Like when I
Yeah.
know it's gonna get to 10. So when I'm at like a 6 or a 7, I'm like, this is gonna keep going up, and I'm going to clench my jaw, or do like a snapped head turn and look at someone, or say the worst thing that I do, and I hate that I can't control this, is try and allude to the thing in a sly way without being mean, but be like, oh, like, are you eating something? Like if someone walks by and they're like chewing
Yeah.
something and I hear them like breathing out of their nose or like, and I do those and it slips out and I'm like, I hate that I do that. And I have so much guilt after because I'm like, I could have just not said anything very easily because I can't do anything. And in my head, I think there's going to be some kind of positive reinforcement or a tweak that I could make for someone else, which is again such an awful controlling thing. I'd be like, hey, little comment, and then they go, oh yeah, good point, and then they stop, and then their behavior changed forever. Like that
I think you
doesn't
can
happen.
Obi Wan Kenobi them into complying.
Yeah, and then, but like those thoughts make me realize, like, okay, this is a control thing because the world isn't operating in the way I want it to. And I feel like there is some combination of fight or flight and control that makes this negative cocktail that is misophonia.
Yeah, control comes up a lot. And yeah, I mean, yeah, you're now I understand your leveling thing is I think similar to something I mentioned is maybe is it's just kind of like being aware before a trigger starts and while it's getting worse, that to try to kind of like prepare your mind to kind of hopefully um well, I guess I mean, in your situation, you're not telling your mind to kind of calm down. Maybe you are, but I sometimes tell people like, okay, if you're going to sit down and eat or something over the family or whatever, just kind of before anything happens, just tell your brain, look around. You're not in the Amazon jungle like 5 million years ago. Nothing's going to come and jump on you or attack you, and that can somehow, if you can catch it early enough, that can maybe lower the stress level in your brain enough to like not react as hard. It's what happens is like when you don't think about it, and then a trigger happens, and then it's like game on, and or
Mhm.
almost like game over, where it's like it's going to be a downward spiral no matter what you try to do. So yeah, so maybe I'm going to try that leveling thing too, is just trying to give a three strikes or I'm out kind of strategy. See how
And
that goes.
what what I and I, again, I don't I don't necessarily advise it, because I again don't know what's right. Whereas years prior, a therapist said, "Be in the moment, work through it." Like
Mm,
that's a little easier than said than done. Um, on my end, I have literally just reverted to having to get up a lot. Oh,
yeah.
I got to go wash the dishes. Oh, and when I eat, like my wife and I only eat with the TV on. We have TV trays and we sit with the TV on. And I'll
Mm,
have to be like, "Hey, can you turn it up a little bit?" And and it's not a her specific thing. It's just like most people. Um, and what the awful thing is, like I'll hear one, whatever the sound may be, or something like that. And I think a lot of people, they think the feeling is, oh, I find this sound gross or unnerving
right.
or whatever. But what they don't realize, and especially like as an individual, the way I feel, I very literally feel my whole body tensing up. I start getting a headache. I can feel my heart pounding, and it's from a noise. And trying to explain that to someone that this is an actual physical response, not just a mental thing where I think something is gross
Right.
or, you know, an
It's not a pet peeve. Yeah.
exactly. And that's one of the most confusing things to explain. And keep in mind, like if you have a good circle of friends, they totally understand and they're super cool about it. And like even some of my friends will like my friend Sean who owns the Rootless Coffee with me will be somewhere and he'll look at me and go, "That's driving you crazy, isn't it?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." uh, and like it's kind of like our nice little like inside joke thing where it's like no one else has to know. It's cool.
Yeah.
But what I noticed was like I was at the Flint Farmers Market. It's like this really big spread out place. So I could be like 15 feet away from someone at the table. So Sean and I will go there and do some work. And then people like someone got wings and they were like 4 tables away. Keep in mind
Oh,
how long that distance is. And they were doing the thumb suck or the finger sucking thing. And
yeah.
my personal background is I'm also a germaphobe. So putting your fingers in your mouth was already like a weird thing for me. And then you add the sound to it, and then it just adds that extra like, oh, like it was like a almost like a whistle sound, but there's this frequency. And I kind of mentioned this in the actual like Misophonia song, like a good frequency means everything to me.
Yes, I have
Um,
that written down. Yeah.
and the reason that is because it's like it's the nails on the chalkboard concept where a like thumb suck sound hits this frequency that I can't explain, and I again don't unfortunately know enough about music or sound or whatever, where it's just like it's white pain through my brain. Like I literally feel the ache,
Yeah.
and I can't turn it off. It's the same as if you hit your shin on something, like it's that kind of feeling, and uh, yeah. Anyway, the long-winded version of that short is there are certain sounds, and the lasting effects of them are, I think, very surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. You did mention another thing that's come up a lot is um, feelings of guilt and shame about giving the glare or whatever you have to do. Um, do you has that come up a lot for you? And it can also lead to distance between whether it's friendships or family relationships or whatnot. Is that something that's kind of been on your mind too, or have you noticed that in your life?
Um, I I have, but if I'm genuinely friends enough with someone, it will bypass that feeling.
Hmm.
So, for example, like some of my friends that I know eat a certain way, I just don't make eye contact. I'm just heads down or like eyes down the whole time.
Yeah.
I usually will eat really fast to get through it sooner so I could get up and, like I mentioned before, I get up often. Um,
Yep.
but I haven't actually like completely pushed away anyone for that reason or like left them out of a thing, but maybe that type of situation I have. So like it's less of, hey, you want to go out to get food, and more of, hey, let's go get coffee. Like you
Right.
can't really mess that one up. um,
Right. Right.
and so this is one I want to send your way. So slurping sounds were a very big one for me, but a strange one was when I went to Japan and everyone was drinking ramen, like native Japanese people were drinking ramen and slurping it. And someone explained to me, oh no, you have to do that because it aerates it and cools it down and you get all of the flavors, similar to coffee. And I swear to God, it turned that switch off in my brain. And I went, oh, okay. And then I had a weird moment where I was like, I think I've just added meaning to this thing and it's now practical, whereas before it was unnecessary. And I like solved that one thing. Have you found that with any of those kinds of triggers?
That's really interesting. No, I haven't really found that, but that could be linked to the fact that you've kind of convinced your brain that it's not dangerous and there is some context behind it. Maybe that's what's going on there, and somehow, fortunately, it hardened in your brain, and maybe it's forever linked that way, and that's why I turned it off. That's really interesting.
Yeah, because I'm vegetarian and would be traveling all over the world to these different countries on tour. And I remember so part of my control thing was like, well, I need to find like a vegan restaurant or I need to find whatever. And then I noticed that I was inconveniencing other people with my personal lifestyle. And
Right.
then that's what started making me think about it. And I'm like, if I reverse this situation, that's how people think about me when I'm doing this stuff to them. And I was like, huh. And so I've had these like revelations like that where, for example, different cultures, there are different sounds or different
True.
ways of existing that are just different. So I often wonder, like, maybe it's I was raised in this way, and then when I'm put in the world and I see other versions of it. So, for example, like my brother, like he's a pretty intense chewer, and like we've talked about it, and he was like, when I started like openly talking about all this stuff, he was one of the first people. He's like, I always thought you were just being rude, but I didn't know there was like an actual thing going on. And he like apologized and like, you don't have to. Like, I just unfortunately can't like watch you eat,
Yeah.
but I don't really want to watch anyone eat, to be fair. So there's like these certain moments where I could solve something and crack the code, and I add context and meaning to it. And then there's other things where I'm like, I will never understand. Like popcorn, the existence of it is to make a pop because people like eating loud, fun foods. Chips, another one for me. I can't be in a room when people are eating chips because every single bite like is one of my triggers.
10 times as loud. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like it's a food meant to project, right? So for me, for you, for a lot of people, that's just like this exacerbated trigger. So I have to remember though that the purpose of the food and the reason the person likes eating that food are the same thing. Like it's actually a thing people enjoy. So I've tried to like make sense of certain triggers like that, but even then I'd be like, well, you could like bite the chip but put your mouth all the way around it so it's not as loud. And then I start
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
you know,
That's what I was thinking as you were saying that. I was like, yeah, but yeah.
because it like a mouth is a megaphone if you use it a
Yeah.
certain way. So like with certain foods, I'm like, well, you put it in your mouth, then you close your mouth, and then you chew. Like, but again, I'm sure you've heard, now over 100 people be like, well, why can't people just do this? Like that's this thought
Mm,
that we all have. We have to. It's hard to like disconnect ourselves from that.
absolutely. Yeah. The ramen explanation, since it actually makes a little bit more, yeah, I don't know, plausible sense. Maybe that's why that stuck. But you're right. All these other things like chips. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's really no difference between, in terms of enjoyment, between eating it quietly and eating it loudly. So we're like, just take it easy on that chip.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're getting to about an hour. I feel like we haven't even. I'd like to actually talk a little bit about some of more your creative projects, I guess, before we go. So um, Life of Misophonia, obviously, I'm going to make sure as many people listen to it as possible. But has Misophonia creeped into any of your other creative projects or business projects since then?
So the creative projects, as far as like if I'm doing digital marketing, for example, or Rootless Coffee, where I do a lot of, or I do all of our like social media and all that. What
Yeah.
I've noticed is when I'm editing video, like lip smacking, all these little things where I'm like, I would change that. And I have the ability to have that control for those moments and be like, all right, like I'm playing
Yep.
God. This is cool. So in those cases, as far as like editing others, you have a podcast, and I apologize for any sounds I'm making because I know you have
No,
to edit.
I go into Logic Pro and I edit everything up by hand, and I have now I have Isotope RX8 where I can like it actually has a mouth declick setting specifically for mouth sounds,
Oh wow,
and
okay.
so anyways, but
But that's
yeah,
like that's one of those one of the things I think about often. Where
yeah,
I did. Are you familiar with Loom? Like the
the video sharing, yeah, is that
yeah.
what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yep. So I did one for one of our clients where I was walking through like a website wireframe yesterday, and I realized I haven't had water in a while, and I just was making like really intense saliva sounds. And
Yep,
I
yep.
watched the video 10 times in a row. It's a 5 minute video, so it was almost a full hour of reviewing this. And all I could think of was that one time when I start talking, I sound like I have really bad dry mouth. I wonder if they're going to be upset about it. And I just was like critiquing and I'm like, nope, send, over, move on. Like,
Yeah,
um, so in that aspect, sure. I whether it's me or other people, like I noticed that, and we're all on Zoom calls and hearing
right.
people talking to them, whatever. Um, Another one is if if people eat on the phone with me, I just don't find that necessary or conductive to anything real. So I can't hang with that. One of my
I tell
friends,
people to stop eating, yeah, on a Zoom call or whatever. I mean, that's just I can't.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're eating into a microphone. Like put it on mute. And that's not even like a like misophonia thing. That's weird.
right.
You're projecting that sound. So anyway, so like that kind of thing has happened a few times where my friend and I were working on a project, and we would be on like 2 to 3 hour calls, and then he would start eating like a salad while we were talking, but he wouldn't put it on mute. And I like, without having to try and explain the whole misophonia thing to every single person I talk to, I'd be like, "Hey man, can you put it on mute like while you're eating?" He's like, "Oh, is it bugging you?" Yup.
Well,
And like then it makes you think, does it not bug other people, or do they just not
yeah, I
say
was like, I was like, the fact that I've maybe brought her up suggests that it is bothering
it?
me.
I actually like it. Can you turn it up?
Right.
um, so there's that version, and then one of the like one of the first comics that technically got picked up, and then the person kind of just disappeared. But I was working on one that was based on so since I'm like from the Flint area, like I was around when the whole Flint water crisis was going on, and
Right.
I did one about how I wanted to tell a story about anxiety and misophonia and all of these things through the context of a young barista again. What I also did, it was very obviously like me. All of this was
Hmm.
me. But then it was like, how do I throw this into a wild metaphor and make it a thing? So what happened was when this guy had anxiety bad enough, he was able to control things with his mind. So the thing we talk about, where I want control, I want control, I want to do this,
Yeah.
it was like the negative side of it, of this is what would actually happen, where maybe you can't control that. And it only happens when you're the most anxious. So why would you be making rational choices? So I won't say the name of it just in case one day I actually, give it another shot. But it was politely passed on, or when it did get picked up, guy disappeared. So it'll never be a thing probably. But anyway, I actually very literally had a whole scene about someone eating buffalo wings, and that starting to be like the instigator for this thing, where you start seeing him doing the thing that I was talking about, like where like you're leveling up and you're like, hey, can you stop that? Whatever. And then it gets worse, and then boom, something really bad happens. So almost like Stranger Things, but anxiety driven and not like interdimensional or whatever.
Right.
So I have messed with that kind of stuff in creative projects. So in theory, like all of them other than coffee, because I think it'd be really hard to sell a coffee for this coffee sounds good. Don't worry.
Right.
But like now that you mentioned it, like it really has kind of ended up in a lot of the creative projects I do, which I guess is my way of venting about anything.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think to see this and to explore this creatively. Maybe I'll quote one more lyric as to close the show. It's from Flying Home from a Funeral for a Funeral. Instead of questioning what's over my head, I'll try to remember what you said. Do your best to spread hope around. Don't get distracted with the hatred of sound. Those are the last words I think on the album. And yeah, I think a great way to maybe to end this interview. I want to thank you, Jono, for coming on. This has been really enlightening, and it's been great to have you. And I know a lot of fans are gonna and new fans are gonna want to hear what you have to say. So, yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for doing what you do and for letting me be a part of it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jono. Everyone, please go listen to Baggage. Grab a bag of beans from Rootless Coffee and pick up some comics. If you liked this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you're listening to the podcast. Music here is always by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.